code name, what would it be full of? Secret Service agents. So directly behind the president's limousine was a car that carried heavily armed Secret Service agents, and the code name of that car was Halfback. Now as you watch this in video, you'll see that two Secret Service agents actually stood on the vehicle's running boards during the motorcade. The others sat in the limousine. There were several in there, in that Halfback. The two Secret Service agents that stood on the vehicle's running boards on the driver's side were Clint Hill and Tim McIntyre. Hill stood closest to the presidential limousine on the driver's side running board, and McIntyre behind him. And you'll see this in videos. So in the car were Secret Service agents, including Clint Hill and Tim McIntyre, both who were standing on the vehicle's running boards on the driver's side. Not one on each side, on the driver's side. Okay? You know who else was in that car? You know who else was in the Secret Service car? Kenneth O'Donnell and David Powers, Kennedy's two closest aides. Kenneth O'Donnell and David Powers. These two fellas right up there with Johnny We Hardly Knew You, those two fellas right there with President Kennedy, both were in the Secret Service limousine during the motorcade parade. The next car behind the Secret Service vehicle was a limousine, and guess who was in there? Lyndon Johnson, Lyndon Johnson's wife, and who else? Ralph Yarborough. Actually, Robert Kennedy was back in D.C. That's a good point. We'll get to that. So the Secret Service vehicle was followed by a limousine that contained Vice President Johnson, his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, and Senator Ralph Yarborough. Now remember, as we mentioned earlier, that Senator Yarborough first refused to ride with President Johnson while in Houston, but it was that visit that Kennedy had with Governor Connolly on Air Force One to invite him to these events that got him in the car. Okay? Well, it's a lot longer. It's got more senators and more congressmen and media and buses, and I mean, it goes forever. You won't worry with that. But from Love Field, when they landed, the motorcade was scheduled to follow, as we know, an 11-mile route through downtown Dallas to the Trademark, where the president was going to speak at a luncheon. Now, I don't want you to write this down. I want you to just listen. The motorcade's going to travel from Love Field down Mockingbird Lane onto Lemon Avenue, a turn into Turtle Creek Drive, onto Cedar Springs, and the main thing it's going to do is it's going to hit the Main Street. That's kind of the big thing where we'll kind of have you pick up. And once they hit Main Street, it'll take them 15 minutes estimated to get to the Trademark. Okay? So where's all the concern going to be? Is the concern going to be at the end of the route, or is the concern going to be throughout the route and down through Dallas? About through the route, yeah, that's where all the people are. Ironically, where the president is shot, they were done. They were just less than a minute from the Stevens Freeway to get out of trouble when the assassination occurred. So the big concern was this 11-mile route, okay? And you can see it here, kind of what he was supposed to do. You can see Love Field and the arrows going down Mockingbird to Lemon to Cedar Springs to Harwood and then on to Maine. So right here is where we're really going to begin our concentration. Because once the motorcade turns on Main Street, as I mentioned, they thought it would take about 15 minutes to reach the Trademark. Okay? All right, now, this gets kind of interesting because you talk about tough presidential protection. So, at 11:45, the presidential motorcade departs from Love Field and starts this 11-mile route that will eventually end up in the Trademark. Okay, 11:45. Weather had cleared. It was a beautiful day. But along the motorcade route, you'll see this on video, you'll see a lot of people, especially children, in yellow raincoats. Because they had gotten there early enough that when it was raining, they wanted to be protected, and some of them still had them on when the president came by. Okay? At 11:50, the president stops the motorcade because he wants to greet a group of small children who were waving a sign that said, "Mr. President, please stop and shake our hands." So he orders the limousine to a complete stop. Would that ever happen today? I mean, it's even close. So President Kennedy sees this group of little small children, and they have a sign that says, "Mr. President, please stop and shake our hands." So he asks Bill Greer to stop the presidential limousine so he can shake hands with these little guys. And he does, at 11:50. Governor Connolly was later quoted as saying about this, he said, "There was one little girl who was carrying the sign. He just told the driver to stop, and of course, he was immediately mobbed by a bunch of youngsters." That was his recollection. Well, the motorcade continues, and then at 12 noon, Kennedy sees a group of Catholic nuns off to the side of the motorcade, and he has the motorcade stop again, and he shakes hands with the sisters. So as the motorcade continues at 12 noon, President Kennedy orders the limousine to stop and shake hands with a group of Catholic nuns. Well, now the Secret Service is becoming nervous. Not only is he stopped twice, as they get in the downtown area, as I mentioned, the crowd was enormous, as many as 20 people deep standing behind each other in the streets. So the Secret Service is going, "Oh my goodness." These people are also crowding onto the street, and like I mentioned, to keep the president away from the crowd, the motorcade drove on the far left side of Main Street, putting Mrs. Kennedy in a dangerous position and hard to protect. Now, because of this is when Clint Hill disobeyed, so to speak, the president's orders, and when they moved him over, what did he do? He got off the running board and ran up and got on top of the presidential limousine on her side and kind of hunkered down and held on, but he was nervous about the close proximity of the person he was supposed to protect in the crowd when they moved to the left. Okay? Well, he stayed on there most of the Main Street route, but as they were preparing to maybe make their move, to go to the interstate later, he got off. But as I mentioned, there were people hanging out of open windows, climbing on signs and statues. It was virtually impossible. And in the heat of the moment, one Secret Service agent allegedly said, quote, "Hell, you can't keep the President of the United States in a steel box." They were becoming very concerned about his safety. Well, we'll finish with this today. As they get down Main Street and through what they considered would be the biggest problem, they headed towards an area we know in history as Daley Plaza. And I'm going to kind of show you this, and it'll set the stage for tomorrow. This is Daley Plaza, and I'm going to explain it to you before we go today, what this picture actually means. And I'm not so sure I didn't short you guys over there again, did I?
We're good.
Okay, now kind of look at this picture for me because it's hard to see, but this area, right here is Daley Plaza. Okay? Now if you look on the map, Main Street is between these two buildings. This is the Dallas County Courthouse, and this is your museum building. So they're going to come through here, and they're going to take a right on Houston Street, a left on Elm, and they're going to get on the interstate and go to the Trademark. Does that make sense when you look at this? So they're coming out of here, right on this side of the Dallas Courthouse building, and they're going to take a right on Houston and a left on Main, and they're going to get right through this triple underpass. And as soon as they get about over here on the triple underpass, it's going to take them to the Stemmons Freeway, which we'll talk about tomorrow, and take them to the Trademark. So if you look at this, when they're in Daley Plaza, they are done. My God, they have made the route. They haven't had any problems, and the issue is going to end up right here at the very end of the motorcade route when they were relaxed and for sure. And Clint Hill got off of the presidential limousine just prior to this turn on Houston because he knew they were going to pick up speed and head onto the interstate. He didn't, you know, you don't stand on the back of the limousine under high speed. So that's where we're at. And tomorrow we'll talk about that turn on Houston, and we'll talk about what happens after that. All right. I saw a former student Saturday I haven't seen since the girl graduated from high school. I think it's the longest